that's a life lesson I've learned, which is, if you're not going for the most expensive, then just go for the cheapest, because it's probably better than the second cheapest.
Are you a fitness-loving foodie? Then Defy Snacks is for you. Defy offers real, high-quality chocolate you love, combined with functional ingredients, giving you as much as 26 grams of protein per bag, so you can be both a little bit bad and a little bit good at the same time. As a female-owned brand, Defy dedicates a portion of its profits to other women-owned businesses. Currently sold in the US, you can find us on snacks.com and follow us on social at Defy Snacks.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Holmes. I'm the founder of the creative effectiveness ad tech platform Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. Every week or so, I have the immense privilege and pleasure to interview someone who is senior and exciting and interesting in our industry, and this week is no different. I'm sat here in front of Tom Holmes, who's head of marketing at Altogether Dental, which is part of Haleon. It's a treat to do this podcast in person. I've worked with Tom over a number of years, so it's a pleasure to be here. But Tom, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, can you give them a bit of background?
Absolutely. Yeah. Really excited to be here. So thanks for having me, Tom. And we've just had a great chat before we started recording. So I'm hopeful that the brilliant conversation can carry on and it's no worse now we're actually recording it. But yeah, so I'm Tom Holmes. I head up marketing for Altogether Dental, which is a digital service as part of Haleon. And I've worked at that company for 14 and a half years. So started there as an intern before coming back on the graduate scheme. So very traditional kind of marketing background. I was brand manager of a number of brands. And then did various different digital roles, global innovation roles, where I worked with yourself, and now leading that digital service. So that's me. That's me in a nutshell.
Well, congrats on getting in early days on the grad program. So this is unusual. I'd say that a lot of folk we have on the podcast haven't stuck in the same organization. So I'm really curious to know, what has been the best investment of your own time, energy, or money in your career at GSK and now Haleon?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's all been about that ability to change. And to your point around, staying at the same company for that long, there's been huge amounts of change, many different joint ventures and mergers and acquisitions and obviously internal moves I've done as well. But yeah, that's probably been the most useful skill that I've been able to use across multiple different roles in my whole career to date. And what I mean by that ability to change is both kind of internally, whether that's changing strategies, restructures, priorities, and clearly externally, consumer trends, technology trends, how you can stay on top of those. And an example I kind of give a little bit is, perhaps more from an internal lens, but actually if you can't understand a decision that a senior leader's made, or you feel like you're almost competing for budget with another team, well then how could you ever do that leader's job? And so I think that's just, so for me, it's that kind of that ability to understand that kind of wider direction or context or change that your team or your brand or your whole org is going through, and is it's something that has certainly helped me in my career and helped me grow and develop.
So what about those people who aren't good at change? Because as you get older, it happens to us all, it's happening every minute, something's happened and you're like, oh really, I've got so. But whereas when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, you're like, brilliant, you absorb all that stuff and you're like, everything's changing, everything's new. So how do you make sure not only that you change in the right way, but you have the energy for it? And how do you make yourself change when you've got so much muscle memory about doing it a different way?
Well, I think to what you allude to there, it links massively to learning and learning agility. So it's that constant kind of curiosity, I think, is very, very helpful. But also the other piece of advice I would give people, if people feel like I'm not particularly good at change, or I get nervous with change, or I want that kind of continuity, would be to try and put yourself in as many new positions and opportunities that you can. And actually, I think that's probably easier to do outside of work. Like what you don't want to do is be constantly changing role into a totally new function and filling out of your depth every 6 months. Whereas you can kind of learn those things and develop that kind of skill set and that, to some extent, mindset through doing things externally. And a great example I can give you, which I think you also, if I read your blog correctly recently, you also did. But last year, I did a stand-up comedy course. Now, there's nothing I could say that I could directly attribute back to me being a better marketer or in any way, but it does just help you putting yourself in those new experiences and that kind of, that some respect, that kind of state of fear. It just helps you feel more confident in other different situations.
Yeah, I also did that course many years ago, and I know there's tons of attributable stuff. I think that the main thing for me was the idea that you have like a 5-minute set, and then you do that set in front of different audiences, and people laugh at some things. People didn't really laugh very much at my stuff. It was painful, man. But you're like, oh, that bit works, or that bit of body language seemed to make sense, or that change of tone of voice or pace, and so you include that in the next round. So it's kind of very much it's startup-y, really. It's like you create a thing, you put it out to the audience, and you receive data, and then you sharpen the product based off the back of it. And I think, but most importantly, it completely destroys any fear you have about presenting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I've got 50 slides. All the words are pretty much on the slides. There's nice pictures versus still in front of a room going through some awful material. It just, I think it changes you on the inside, I think.
I'm not sure it's the best advice to become a better marketer, but certainly it's one of those examples that helps you, I think, improve and be just more prepared and ready to change and be able to adapt. And if I look at my own career, pretty much every role I've done in the last 10 years has been brand new to the org. So I've not had a handover in a decade. And that's very much how I try and position myself, which is this, like, I can go into any type of role, any change, any opportunity and make it a success from scratch. And so, it just really that is the kind of one area that I think has helped me in good stead in that 14 and a half years.
So what advice do you have for people who want to become better data-driven marketers?
Well, it somewhat links to that last point, but for me, it's really all about understanding the bigger picture. Being able to take a step back and be clear on what you're trying to achieve. And an example of that for me is that there's just no point in chasing, better, higher metrics for the sake of chasing metrics. I saw a post on LinkedIn recently that was kind of saying, oh, this is how you can get your email open rates above 50%, and it was all about, pretend it's an internal staff discount only, or fake an email from the CEO that was meant to be sent internally. And it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, you're getting a higher open rate, and maybe you then get some sales off the back of that, but ultimately it's just a very short-termism approach. And a really interesting example, I think, that's quite topical currently, and actually before I say this, I'm hyper aware that the more well-known someone is, the more famous they are, the easier it is to kind of point out flaws. And in many ways it's someone I've got a lot of respect for and admire, but very topically currently is Stephen Bartlett, right? And I think they've clearly gone and they've talked very publicly about the Diary of a CEO podcast and how they're constantly chasing that kind of like data-driven growth, and we'll optimize 300 images at a time for every podcast that we record. And really what that's led to, if you look at their YouTube page, it reminds me a lot of the Daily Mail and the Naughties. It's very like, you're not going to believe this food causes this illness, type, hooks to try and get people in. And they've skewed more towards health. I suspect that's probably because it gets more engagement. It might just be it's more of an interest, for the host as well. But now they're in that tricky position of, they're getting called out for having, poor health advice, misleading scientific advice. Multiple ads of brands he invests in have been banned for being misleading. And so I think that's just an example. If you chase just growth upon growth upon growth at all costs, you will eventually get to a place where actually what you're trying to achieve probably wasn't really what you set out to. And if Stephen, if you are listening and you do want some of my advice, then if he was here in the room, I would say, what's that purpose? What's that bigger picture? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Is it just purely commercial success? Okay, but actually, is it that he wants to inspire a generation? Is it that he wants to try and get people more interested in business and be able to develop themselves and grow themselves? And then I would use that kind of like bigger picture purpose to then be like, great, what does that mean and what are we trying to achieve?
So we're going to move on now to your shiny new object, which is behavioural psychology. I think the last person to talk about that at any length on this podcast was Rory Sutherland. So, I've high expectations, Tom.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm just such a massive fan of his. So really, most of what I'm about to say is just probably repeating things he's said in the past. But I got to meet him recently at an event. It was kind of a charity book launch, and I just really, really rate him. He's someone that has just a totally different perspective, and I find really, really insightful. I really buy into that. Not all problems can be solved with logic and rationality alone. And I think the reason it's kind of my shiny new object. You could argue it's not particularly shiny and it's not particularly new. It probably more is for me. And I just found, as I've got older, I'm really interested and excited about psychology. And I don't know about you, but like for me, when I was at kind of school and the sixth form in particular, it was a real DOS subject. It was kind of what you did as an easy subject to kind of, I don't know, and it was kind of unpopular. And just as I've got older and older, not that I'm that old now, but as I have got older, I just find it really, really fascinating, both in kind of life and clearly the obvious links to marketing. And I think the other thing as well around it is, if you look at a lot of the topics of typically people what would talk about on this podcast, those shiny new things, there's just been so many that have been overhyped, so many that haven't been. Clearly AI is here to stay and is clearly a wonderful tool, and there'll be so many more applications we'll see. But if I think back over my kind of 14-year career, there's so many different things, like the metaverse I'd put up there as one that was huge. We're all going to be living in this digital world and we're constantly wearing VR and AR goggles constantly. I remember vividly when I worked in a digital role before being like, how are we going to leverage blockchain to improve our marketing, and having to like phone up my brother who did a degree in computer science to be like, what is blockchain? How could it be applicable to marketing? And him just saying it can't. So there's just been so many of those things. And some of them, I mean, admittedly, another one that sprung to mind was QR codes, which I remember being huge when I first started my career, and they were going to be this game changer. But actually, that was 2010, 2011 time. Clearly no one had the technology on their phones. So, it was completely, and they died a death until COVID, right? And then suddenly they were this really useful technology and tool for the use case that we all found ourselves in, and we all had much better smartphones, so they'd actually work. But so I guess what I'm saying is, I used to be really obsessed about the shiny new things, and perhaps as I've got a little bit more older and probably slightly more senior in my career, I'm wary of the shiny new things. And I think sometimes if you're a CMO with AI, for example, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you come out and saying, actually, the bulk of what we do is going to remain the same and it's not going to be fundamentally shifted by AI, says no CMO ever, because you're going to look like a bit of a digital dinosaur. But equally, I imagine most CMOs of big, large FTSE 100 companies, aren't thinking that AI is going to replace, is going to change every single thing they do in 2025. So it's that kind of balancing act. And then maybe that's why I think, for that reason, I think like psychology and behavioral psychology and its applicableness to marketing is always going to be relevant. And clearly it's hyper relevant for healthcare and how we can help people make better, kind of like more informed choices, or take better actions. And really that's for me, it could be simplified into two main ways that it can be used. And that's either understanding consumers and understanding that it's not always logical and rational, and really understanding their kind of motivations, even sometimes when they don't fully understand it themselves. And then, like I say, how we can change a consumer's behavior, whether that's through kind of nudge theory or, different psychological principles like scarcity principle or social proof. And so there's loads of good examples I can touch on of brands that have done that brilliantly, but it's just an area that I'm constantly wanting to learn more about and apply to my work. But certainly not an area that I would say I'm an expert in, certainly not compared to Rory Sutherland anyway.
So give me some of those examples of the brands you feel have used behavioural psychology well.
Well, I saw something really recently actually about McDonald's and how actually their revenue has declined, but they've massively increased profitability. And it was really all about how do we convince their shoppers, their customers, to make more profitable choices for them. So it's kind of upselling, and so although that's dipped their revenue, actually profitability over the last kind of 15 years has doubled, and a lot of that through how you construct the menu and the extra add-ons and, do you want this as well, type behavior and that kind of choice architecture. And similarly, I remember one of our agencies saying before that also worked on Beefeater restaurants. I remember them telling us that actually they moved the location of onion rings on their printed menu in restaurants, and it cost them £75,000 a year. So it's like such a tiny thing that you'd be really, really hard to think about. And actually, if you were the designer, if you were the marketer, that wouldn't make a huge difference. But actually, having that in a certain position, next to the burger means people are more likely to go, oh yeah, okay, great, I'll get that as well. And again, I mean, this is just a classic Rory Sutherland example, and I really can't stress enough how much of a fan I am. But also kind of from a restaurant perspective, he talks about that example of why the drinks list is called a wine list and why there's already wine glasses on the table, and it's just because it's highly more profitable. You can sell a bottle of wine for any kind of price you want, really. Whereas actually a beer, we all have a kind of more fixed price in our mind of what that will cost. And of course, you can add to that typically the cheapest bottle of actually the second cheapest bottle of wine on most drinks menus is actually the most profitable, because most people don't want to pick that bottom bottle of wine and look like they're trying the cheapest. So that's a life lesson I've learned, which is if you're not going for the most expensive, then just go for the cheapest, because it's probably better than the second cheapest.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com.
So how are you using behavioural psychology in your work today?
Well, a lot of what we're working on currently, so Altogether Dental is a dental membership helping people access more affordable dental services. So we're exclusively in the US, where obviously dental and healthcare costs are significantly much more expensive than here in the UK, and probably the most expensive in the world. And actually, a big growth driver for us as we move into next year. We've typically been very D2C focused and search and social and digital marketing spend to acquire customers, but actually a big focus is how we can drive sales via B2B. So offering this kind of membership option as an alternative to dental insurance. So whether that's a company that already are looking to save costs and want to kind of scale back on their dental insurance costs and offer this dental savings program instead, or potentially companies where some of their employees, potentially in a head office role, get really great benefits, and some others in a warehouse or a factory perhaps don't get that same level of benefits. How can they still offer a kind of saving? And what's really interesting is we're seeing that people that come via their employer, although they're actually very similar to our D2C audience in terms of demographically and lower earner, actually they're much more likely to make, quite frankly for us, like more profitable choices. They're more likely to add their family members and pay for a family plan. They're much more likely to sign up annually rather than monthly. And so clearly there's some quite obvious rational reasons why they might do that. They feel kind of more job security, or they feel like actually that cost will, if they lose their job, they'll no longer be tied into that cost because it comes out of their pay packet. But one of the things I'm constantly kind of probing and exploring and trying to understand is, what are those other deeper motivations? And is it just this kind of really obvious rational answer of why people are doing that behavior? Or is there something else that actually is probably unknown to us? And if we knew it, could really help us drive more growth of that channel and offer a better product and service to those consumers.
And is there any ethical consideration here, really? I mean, just going back to the Rory Sutherland example of put wine on the table because it's most profitable. It's not like, well, what do you want? Is it? It's not like, come to this restaurant and we want to give you the best possible experience that's right for you. And if we make more money out of you or someone else, doesn't really matter because we love food and we love creating that moment. But it's manipulation.
Totally, and completely agree with you. And like I kind of alluded to, I think for healthcare, it's a real positive. If we're manipulating people and almost psychologically tricking them into stopping smoking, that's broadly a great thing. It's great for the individual. It's great for their family. It's ultimately great for the taxpayer. So there's lots of knock-on benefits that you can justify by using those different psychological techniques and tricks. It's all positive. But you're right. You look at other industries, and I'd put maybe the restaurants and the McDonald's in the kind of grey area. Of that, maybe they're just optimizing people to pick more profitable products for them rather than getting them to consume more food. But you look at some industries, I would have thought, gambling is one where actually it's all negative, really. And so certainly I would describe myself as a very kind of purpose-driven and values-driven individual. So I wouldn't want to be doing that for something where you just feel you're exploiting someone. And a crazy example that I weirdly heard via my barber, who I think had someone else who goes there that told me this story. But you'll be familiar with the game on the mobile phone Candy Crush. So just kind of, one of those fun, kind of easy games, and you can pay for kind of upgrades, or new kind of different bits of candy, or to skip a level and those kind of things. But pretty low amounts. Like normally, you could pay £1 at a time. I don't know, maybe up to £5. I'm not exactly sure. But guess how much the most amount that any person playing Candy Crush has ever paid to King, the company that made the game.
£1 million or something. I don't know.
£10 million.
What?
£10 million. I know more about the vague identity of the individual, but I probably shouldn't divulge any further. But it's just, clearly they're someone that's very wealthy, but it's crazy, right? It's insane. And by all accounts, they're now just making more levels for that one individual who keeps buying more levels. So it almost just funds the development of the game. So it's that's I suppose a great example where it's like, is that kind of, they've probably got that person hooked, they're addicted to it, they're getting rewarded, is that a good use of behavioural psychology or not? I would certainly say, in my opinion, no.
It reminds me of an app. It was like 10, 15 years ago. It was the £10,000 app or $10,000 app. So on the App Store, when you could develop for it, like there was a you could either charge £1 or £10,000 for an app. So someone made a £10,000 app, and there was a little video of it was like a gem or something. And so really it was a way of social proof. You go, oh, have you got the 10 grand app? I've got this. I didn't do anything. There was no network. There was no. All you could do is get your phone out in a club in a VIP area and go, I've got the £10,000 app. And I don't know, this person sold 50 of them or 100 or something like that and made 10 grand off each of them. A lot of people ask for their money back, but it's that's the sort of behavioral psychology. It's making money by not tricking someone, but preying on those psychological triggers that we all find so hard to say no to. And I ask you the ethics question. I don't think people get into advertising to be humanitarians mostly. So I appreciate the answer. But we're going to have to wrap it up. But one thing on Rory Sutherland, right? So I interviewed Rory Sutherland for my upcoming book about data, creativity, and advertising. It's
and
brilliant.
Me next.
What's that? For the. I'm not. Can I write another book? I don't know. Let's get this one done, and you'll talk about it. So Rory speaks at conferences, and he's all over TikTok. I heard an interesting rumor that someone took all the Rory Sutherland clips, created that TikTok, and then that was bought by
Ogilvy.
Yeah. So apparently, I don't know, maybe that's a rumor, but anyway, someone's done well somewhere. But I'm interested to know, what is Rory Sutherland's behavioural psychology department at Ogilvy's funnel? Right, because there's a lot of Rory awareness, right? But I would love to know how that turns into cash for Ogilvy.
Yeah, I've honestly got no idea. But what
have you been to the website? Have you been to his have you gone past Rory content?
Oh, I don't. Not when it comes to Ogilvy, I wouldn't say.
When you're you could potentially employ that department, right? So I think there's something quite interesting that Rory's amazing at doing Rory. Brilliant. He's got a fantastic partnership product with Madfest and Mad Masters. But I would love to know how that stuff converts.
Well, I imagine his answer would very much be like, well, it's not rational, it's not linear. And if you went and asked their Ogilvy clients, well, did you particularly want to partner with Ogilvy because of Rory Sutherland? They wouldn't be able to give you an exact answer. But what I certainly would say is, it's what I found really interesting is his appeal is stretching beyond marketing. So actually, some of my friends that work in kind of like tech roles and AI or other things have heard of him and are fans of his and are buying his books because it isn't explicit to marketing. And so and I think that's probably only a good thing, right? The more different industries can learn from each other and apply those learnings is probably just a massive positive.
Well, we'll leave it on a quote from Jerry Dakin, who said that marketing does a really bad job of marketing itself, and Rory's doing a good job.
Yeah, and I'd add to that as well. I think marketers are really poor at knowing when they're being marketed to. So particularly when it comes to kind of like, hey, are you awful and all your other colleagues are really brilliant at marketing? Well, buy my course. No, but lots of examples like that. But I don't think we're the best at realizing sometimes when we're being marketed to.
So, Tom, can I leave it there? If someone wants to get in touch with you about behavioural psychology or being a chameleon with an ability to change and understanding the bigger picture and so on, where's a good place to do that? And crucially, what makes a message that you'll actually reply to? Oh,
great question. I mean, LinkedIn is definitely the best way to contact me. I haven't got my own website. Don't really have any plans to. And I think the most important thing is that it's like tailored and relevant. I mean, there's so much trash you get, isn't there? It's just like, hi, I'm doing this and it might be of interest to you. My advice would be, put in kind of 3 minutes of research to look at what someone does and what they might be interested in, because otherwise it's a classic ignore, when it's clearly just a kind of sales message.
Brilliant. Tom, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. So thank you so much for having me.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.